Thank you, Senator Urquhart. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Mr Acting Deputy President. I'm proud to stand here today in defence of the Clean Energy Act, the best set of tools that we presently have to drive the clean energy transition in Australia. I have wondered, as I suspect many people have, what it is that is driving Prime Minister Tony Abbott in this senseless and aggressive attempt to bankrupt the clean energy industry in Australia. And this is uppermost in my mind as Western Australia goes back to the polls on the 5th of April. The Australian Greens have ambitions for Western Australia to be the solar state, and so the desperate and unhinged way in which Prime Minister Abbott has led his team, in the face of overwhelming evidence, would be bewildering but for one thing. Sometimes you hear people suggest that Mr Abbott has an ideological hatred to renewable energy. Why else would you hire someone like Maurice Newman, the outright climate change denier, to review the renewable energy target? But in truth, I don't think it has anything to do with ideology. It is a hard-nosed and very systematic attempt to crash the clean energy industry, not because it isn't succeeding in competing with coal and gas, but because it is competing too well. The coal and gas industries that bankroll the election campaigns of the Liberal and National parties are driving Mr Abbott in this direction, and it makes a dire kind of sense. What could possibly threaten the incumbency of the coal and gas industries, technologies with decades of incumbency, decades of influence, powerful lobby groups with direct access into the cabinet room? Well, I can think of something that would be a direct threat, an energy source where the capital investment is up front and then the fuel costs are eliminated. Gone. An energy source as powerful and limitless as the sun itself, as perpetual as the winds and the tides, or the practically infinite energy of the planet's interior. Imagine, if you will, a solar power station a mile across, running only on sunlight, able to generate electricity day and night. Now imagine the cost of this technology falling so rapidly that even the Commonwealth Government's economic assessments are obsolete on the day that they're printed. This is what is driving the Coalition's unforgivable attack on solar and wind. It's a hardline, last-ditch defence of your donors. It is absolutely essential, then, that we protect this legislation now and after new senators take their seats in July. More than any other single issue, this is the one that is driving the Australian Greens campaign in the West. The fact is, we know that the Clean Energy Act is working. Australia's carbon emissions from the sectors that are covered by the carbon price scheme are down more than 7% since the 1st of July last year. And this is a structural and historic change and a shift in the energy mix away from coal towards gas and renewables, and also a decline for demand for grid energy. And it is largely, not entirely, but largely being driven by the carbon price. We have the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, the OECD, not exactly, you would have thought, likely members of this vast socialist conspiracy that appears to have infected the minds of those who oppose bills such as this, who have urged Prime Minister Tony Abbott not to abandon the price on carbon. It's not only working, but it's making us more globally competitive. If you look at countries like Germany, Denmark, the UK, Korea and Switzerland, these are countries that have ensured their competitiveness, if that's your primary metric and the thing that you care most about, is being driven and linked to low-carbon growth. Clean energy investment has stalled since the announcement of the renewable energy target hatchet job, on top of these climate repeal bills that we're debating today. And there is no question that the practical impact of abolishing the renewable energy target will be to destroy jobs. In 2014, the solar photovoltaic industry employs 12,300 Australians across 4,300 businesses, the vast majority, as you would expect, small businesses. If the renewable energy target is abolished, up to 6,750 solar PV jobs will be lost by 2018, about 2,000 of them in the short term. Now, the government ran on an election promise from opposition of a jobs plan that would create 1 million jobs. So how's that working out for you? Having accidentally presided over the destruction of thousands of skilled manufacturing jobs, you are now setting out to deliberately destroy thousands more. The Greens know that the clean energy future is a jobs-rich future. of jobs that are created per $1 million that you invest. In natural gas, it's 5 jobs per $1 million invested. And it's because the industry is not particularly labour intensive, but it's extremely capital intensive. In the coal industry, it's 7 for every $1 million invested. Smart grid installation, 12 jobs per $1 million expended. In solar energy, it's 14 jobs. In building retrofits, it's 17. And in mass transit and freight rail installation, which this government has also turned its back on, it's 22 jobs per $1 million invested. Now, as a Western Australian, I'm keenly aware that this debate risks turning into a caricature, with the mining industry on one side and everyone else on the other. Now, I know from direct experience that this is not the case. In fact, I strongly believe that it will be regional Western Australian miners who will be the first adopters of large-scale solar. They are not driven by the same motivation as we are necessarily, but that ceases to matter. They will do it on the business case alone, because their survival depends in part on driving down the cost of energy against predicted steep increases in the price of gas and distillate that will blow the marginal impact of the carbon price out of the water. So imagine then if we could create an investment arm of the Commonwealth to help de-risk large-scale renewable energy projects. Imagine if we had a grants body with substantial expertise in the clean energy sector that could help mining companies and other intensive users of electricity to transition out of gas and diesel into the solar industry. Imagine if we had something like that, those entities existed. And then imagine that the government comes into this place and attempts to wreck all of it. Last November, ARENA, which is of course one of the entities that I refer to, held a Resources and Renewable Energy Forum in Perth, 4th of November. The forum was hosted by the Chamber of Minerals and Energy, and it showcased the opportunities for developing renewable energy projects. And again, this is to hedge against predicted skyrocketing increases in gas prices and serious uncertainty about future increases in the price of diesel or distillate. As a piece in Renew Economy that ran in December noted, this piece by Jonathan Gifford on 2nd of December of last year, noted that off-grid mining operations in Australia tend to have electricity supplied either through diesel generation or through gas pipelines. And at the diesel supply sites, ARENA estimates costs of between $200 per megawatt hour, I should say, to $500 per megawatt hour. And the pipeline supplied sites around $100 per megawatt hour. A friend and colleague and sometime mentor of mine, Professor Ray Wills, who's the former head of the WA Sustainable Energy Association, has pointed out that just the diesel market alone presents $1 billion opportunity for renewable energy. He says with over 100 mine sites chewing 700 megawatts of diesel a year, that's a potential $2 billion market in WA alone. The metric is that every 1 megawatt of solar would save almost 500,000 litres of diesel. And so these are the companies that are going to be adopting the grants that are dispersed by ARENA and then stepping up to the large-scale renewable energy projects that are being supported by the Clean Energy Finance Corporation that these people propose to wreck. It's unforgivable. The Greens understand that an electricity network running 100% on the infinite power of sun, wind and wave is not only necessary but possible now. Our Energy 2029 proposal takes this challenge head-on. What would it cost? What technology mix? What efficiency improvements? How many jobs will it create? The Greens didn't write the Energy 2029 scenarios. We relied on the goodwill and expertise of the talented engineers and technologists at a group called Sustainable Energy Now. And it amounts to 26,000 jobs between now and the year 2029 to go fully renewable on the southwest grid. A state quite literally taking its power back. From a family in Girraween to nickel operations in the goldfields, we are going to install the next generation of energy technologies in coming decades and eliminate our fuel bill permanently. Energy 2029 demonstrates the profound truth that the clean energy transition will be much cheaper in the long run than ever increasing combustion of business as usual. We know how to do genuine sustainability and prosperity at the household scale, but what about at the scale of a city of nearly 2 million people? The Transforming Perth collaboration with AUDRAC and the Property Council is one step towards meeting this challenge. It is a blueprint for a city for people. a city centred on fast, zero-emissions public transport. We demonstrated that by reorienting growth along just 7 of the 18 identified public transport corridors, we could create more than 200,000 dwellings, building resilience and diversity and affordability into one of the most car-dependent cities in the world. This work builds on decades of determined and effective advocacy by people like Professor Peter Newman and his team at CUSP, people like my former lecturer Alan Johnstone at Murdoch University, who has inspired a whole generation of students as to the sheer human potential of truly sustainable cities. To bring the vision of a zero-carbon sustainable city to life, we need to build fast, efficient public transport. The Perth Light Rail project is the centrepiece of this vision. We launched this project on the eve of the 2007 election and found a huge well of public support. Working with people across the city, with local government in particular, and public transport advocates, we succeeded in persuading the state government, a state Liberal government, to begin serious feasibility work on a light rail network for Perth. In 2013, the Commonwealth committed $500 million toward rail projects in Perth, including Perth Light Rail, only to see this commitment overturned by incoming Prime Minister Tony Abbott. An investment in public transport is essential to giving people the choice to get out of the traffic jam and cleaning up transport sector emissions. The good news is it doesn't all have to be on budget. Innovative funding mechanisms like tax increment financing can get light rail built in Perth at a fraction of the cost proposed by Premier Barnett. The Transforming Perth proposal imagines diverse, affordable housing clustered along rapid transit arteries, which allows us to rethink the whole housing affordability question. In a city with some of the most unaffordable housing in the world, it is time we took on the tax policies that have deliberately inflated a housing bubble, and it is imperative that we rethink the kind of housing that we build, not just in the cities, but across all communities in WA. The Greens have developed a national housing affordability strategy that directly confronts the tragedy of homelessness and the precarious and terrifying place on the edge of homelessness faced by hundreds of thousands of Australians. For a country increasingly edgy over the future of skilled manufacturing, as this government presides helplessly over the destruction of thousands of jobs, look no further than the modular housing industry. This industry has the potential to provide thousands of skilled jobs in sustainable prefab dwellings, installed in a fraction of time taken using regular construction methods, and made from locally, sustainably grown plantation timber. There's a massive opportunity here if we choose to take it. Consolidating urban growth as we transform Perth has the essential benefit of taking the pressure off our urban bushland and peri-urban agricultural and horticultural areas. It allows us to step up in defence of our last remaining islands of urban bushland and rebuild the links between them. This is the essence of the Perth Greenways project. As the city bakes in its own heat island, we know that shady neighbourhoods are up to 4 degrees cooler than those where concrete and sand dominate the landscape. The government is trying to tear down the Biodiversity Fund, a $1 billion fund that the Greens secured as part of the Clean Energy Package. This is essential to buy back areas of high conservation value habitat currently under direct threat, including places close to home like Point Perrin, Anstey Keen, Belia Wetlands and others. A combination of buybacks, community grants and a moratorium on further clearing of urban bushland is now extremely urgent as we watch ever more habitat going under the bulldozers. The centrepiece of the Greenways project is that the whole network should be protected in the National Reserve System. While we talk about high technology transport options like light rail, we should also keep in mind the important place of the humble bike. The bicycle is one of the most, I think, elegant inventions of the industrial age, and the Perth bike network is effectively broken and looks in places as though it were written in Morse code, dots and dashes that appear on the map with no apparent order. For only 3% of the state transport budget and a commitment of $80 million nationally by the Commonwealth Government, Perth and other Australian cities could become the world's best for bikes, and that is the essence of the Bike Vision Plan that the Australian Greens launched in WA a little over a year ago. Western Australia's population is overwhelmingly concentrated in the southwest of the state, but if you want to understand the future of the city, look to the regions. Western Australia's rural communities are essential to our food security, our economy and our cultural identity. Around 11,000 people worked in agriculture in WA in 2009-10, with Western Australian farm products generating around $6 billion, just under $6 billion in revenue, or about 11% of the state's GDP. Many farmers and pastoralists are practising sustainable farming, but they still face wildly unpredictable rainfall, poor returns, volatile world markets and extreme weather events as a result of climate change. And that's why the Australian Greens developed a regional resilience plan designed to safeguard prime agricultural land from extractive industries, to increase substantially our investment in research and development by $300 million to assist farmers to stay on the land, to provide $100 million in grants for farmers to be more energy self-sufficient, to reform competition policy to serve the interests of the community and not just big business, an initiative providing $85 million to help farmers sell locally and to get a fair price. Very importantly, for the southwest of WA, to invest in Tier 3 grain rail lines to help our wheat exporters do the job that we need them to do, and to invest in the enormous potential of oil mallee cropping, to put an energy crop into the rotation as a way as well of offsetting the devastating impact of dryland salinity in the Western Australian wheat belt. These are the initiatives that the Australian Greens believe are most urgent for Western Australia, and we will continue to advocate for them, not because of this government, but in fact despite this government that proposes to do so much damage with these repeal bills and so many others. We could not obviously do this work alone, and our role in here as political advocates is backed up by a very deep well of support in the community. Groups like the Australian Solar Council, the national peak solar industry body, who just today has asked Western Australians to vote to support solar energy in the Western Australian Senate election on April 5. I want to acknowledge the Western Australian Renewable Energy Target Alliance, an industry-led body gearing up to save the renewable energy target from the senseless assault proposed by the Liberal and National parties. Sustainable Energy Now, a group very close to my heart, engineers, technologists, practitioners, economists, those who helped, who drove and wrote the Energy 2029 scenarios for Western Australia. But we know that these decisions will not all be made in boardrooms, and while we have those designing the new platforms and designing the industries of the future, we also need to protect what we have. Whether it be farmers in the Midwest of WA gearing up to lock the gate against the invasion of the gas fracking industry that proposes to do so much extraordinary damage to our groundwater resources and landscapes between the southwest, the Midwest and the Kimberley of Western Australia. To people like John Moylan and everyone stepping up to stop the Maules Creek coal mine and protect the Laird State Forest in New South Wales. These are all parts of the same campaign. The Kimberley mob gearing up to take on fracking the entire Canning Basin by Baroo. To the tunnel picketers in Melbourne who are asking for no more than a substantial investment in public transport rather than more road building. And those undertaking direct action in Western Australia, those who will camp tonight in the great southwest forests. Those of the WA Forest Alliance, people like Jess Beckling and those who are on a forest platform protecting these essential stands of native biodiversity, even as the impacts of climate change worsen across the southwest of WA. All of us are in this together. These are the campaigns that will determine not just the makeup of the Australian Senate after this July, but the kind of world inherited by people who were too young to vote in the poll of last September. Dangerous climate change, in my view, is already with us. The choices that we make in votes like that today are whether we can perhaps avoid catastrophic climate change. And I would hope that that is something that the Australian government can get past the interests of those key financial backers and get behind. I thank the chamber.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam. Senator